As a spiritual woman, lover, and leader, you have two nervous systems that are supporting you to either co-create the realities you prefer in life, love, and leadership, where you have an expanded capacity to hold more freedom and everything else you want inside of your life, your love, your leadership. Or you're experiencing the nervous system that is holding your liberation hostage. In this conversation, I'm going to share with you those two different nervous systems and how they tend to show up. And we're going to deepen specifically in the conversation around healthy shame versus toxic shame, because I have been seeing here on these internet streets the conversation around shame circulating. However, it is missing information, it's missing context. And I believe it's important that we share the nuances of these very important topics to support your evolution as you are ascending to not only experiencing more of yourself, but also showing up in your life, your relations, and your leadership in the way you know deep down you're capable of, and as that version of yourself that is what I call inside of my work the supernatural woman. So hey there, powerful soul, welcome to my world. I'm Cassandra Austin McDonald, and I am super thrilled to have this conversation with you. So first, we're going to talk about healthy shame. And healthy shame is the original divine design, in my humble opinion, where we are experiencing this internal moral compass of ours. And it comes from a parasympathetic state within our nervous system, which means that our nervous system is open, it is receptive, we have the ability to be reflective, we are in that rest and digest state. This is to promote our growth, to support accountability, and to allow us to have ethical behavior. So it's important that we have healthy shame. The conversations I am seeing are around not having shame at all, and that is incorrect. We need shame as human beings to continue to interact with each other and co-create new realities where we have ethics and morality, and it's for the good of humanity. I believe humanity has found itself in all sorts, if you will, because people have forgotten about that internal moral compass. They are not connected to that deep inner spiritual knowing of what is right or wrong. And when we are in that healthy shame, that nervous system that is not all dysregulated and discombobulated, we are able to experience the discomfort from the behavior and then correct the behavior. And so this type of shame says, I did something wrong or bad. Okay. And it's about having a healthy guilt, again, to guide us with that moral compass so that it's guiding our behaviors, it's guiding our choices, it's guiding our actions. Now, when we look at toxic shame, this is a learned, adopted way of being that is not our original divine design. We can see in the Garden of Eden, during the very beginning of the scriptures, where it talks about the shame that Adam and Eve felt when they recognized that they were unclothed and they were naked. Well, scripture also reveals that they actually were not supposed to feel shame. And so shame is not our original divine design by our maker. And so when we are in toxic shame, our nervous system can be in a state of sympathetic, which means it's acting as fight or flight or freeze or fawn. And it's in this accelerated state of closing and contracting. You can even see what's happening to my body temple as I'm in that state. It's closing and contracting. There is this internal belief that one is inherently flawed or unworthy. And this can lead to lying. This can lead to secrecy. This can lead to destructive behaviors. I'm going to share some examples here in a moment. to numb the body temple. And this comes from this belief that I am wrong, I am bad. And so toxic or healthy shame rather says the action or the behavior that I did was wrong or bad. Toxic shame says I am wrong or bad. Can you see the difference in that? And this creates a painful sense of unworthiness. And it is coming from distorted thinking. This is often a paradigm that was internalized from an external source, meaning somebody, your parent or a teacher or a caregiver or some authority figure in your life said something to you about you, and you internalize that as truth. And now that is the unconscious crippling belief running the show behind the scenes around how you see yourself, your self-image. This creates separation from God. This creates separation from yourself. This creates separation from each other. And I believe what we're seeing playing out right now is toxic shame, where a lot of people don't even realize they're experiencing it. And so they're projecting their internal realities onto others. There is a phrase that I've been known to say for years that projections are confessions, pay attention. And so when we are in these two different worlds within ourselves, this is how we start to deepen our understanding of who we be and how we're showing up within our life experiences, how we're showing up in our interactions and our relationships, how we're showing up as leaders. Now, I'm not an artist in the way of drawing. I'm an artist in other ways. However, I did draw my little stick figures, so bear with me. And here you'll see I have healthy shame. My camera is a little flop. That's okay, but you can see they're open. There's a smiley face. And then here we see toxic shame, closed. This is to symbolize folded arms. And so if you could even imagine the internal and the physical representation of these different states. Now, when we are navigating our experiences with each other, and you feel judged, you feel othered, what happens in your body? Or do you judge and other people? In my former career, I was a treatment specialist and a case manager. And I worked with both adult and juveniles who had been court ordered to work with me from a judge due to the different reasons that they had gotten themselves involved in the criminal justice system. They committed an offense that was not heinous enough for them to be incarcerated, but it was enough of an infraction for it to have to be addressed and corrected. And so they were often court ordered to different forms of treatment and case management, and then that's when they would come land on my caseload. And some of those reasons that I worked with individuals were addictions. They had different drug addictions, such as heroin and methamphetamine or crack cocaine or cocaine or pain pill addictions. There were so many different addictions that they had. Alcohol, or they had mental health diagnoses that were becoming a bit severe, or they had destructive behaviors. Now, you may be hearing me say this and think, I'm not a criminal. What's this got to do with me? You would be surprised at some of the people that I worked with who society deems as successful. I've worked with people who are politicians and attorneys. I've worked with people in that time period who society would never guess were experiencing some of the challenges that they were experiencing in their lives and how they were handling themselves in those experiences. And I remember during this time, I started to feel that healthy shame of conviction in my spirit of, even though I don't have these types of addictions that my clients have, I have my own. I have my own vices. I have my own numbing mechanisms. I have my own avoidance patterns. I have my own ways of coping and dealing with the stresses of life. And I started to feel convicted as a practitioner that if I'm going to support these souls that God has entrusted to sit across from me and facilitate positive behavioral change, to facilitate life-changing transformation, to facilitate the types of transformational outcomes that made absolutely no sense, I needed to step it up inside of my own embodiment as a practitioner. And so I started looking at, where was I numbing? Because I was stressed. I started looking at the vices that I had when I felt triggered. And I started exploring these nuanced realities within my own beingness and within myself. And I remember I was navigating my relationship with myself and my understanding of Creator on a level that I thought I had already explored as someone who started transformational work actually quite young. The very first time I started to engage intentionally in personal growth and development work was around the time that I became a solo mama. I got pregnant with my son when I was 19 in college. And when I gave birth to him and started navigating parenting with his dad, there were some dynamics showing up in our relationship that was showing me that there's something about our relationship that's reminding me of what I saw and what I witnessed in childhood growing up. And that didn't feel good for me. And I went to a campus counselor and I started asking questions about, how is this possible? I was so intentional and I thought that I was coming with the best of intentions to not recreate the past. I thought I was coming with the best intentions to not experience what I witnessed and saw in my childhood. I thought that I was coming in this relationship with a new beingness. And then that's when I started learning. I mean, we're talking about over 2 decades ago, before any of this stuff was popular. I started learning about inner child healing work, and I started learning about toxic shame and healthy shame. And I started learning about trauma and relational trauma and all of these different concepts that are more mainstream and more known in pop psychology and here on these internet streets and social media. I was learning over 2 decades ago as a student in undergrad, just wanting to understand myself better and wanting to understand how I ended up in this relationship. And now I have a child with this person. And I started to feel shame that some of the very behaviors that I witnessed and were modeled in front of me growing up as a little girl were starting to play out in my relationship. And I didn't know what to do with that. I didn't know what to do with that. I didn't know how to be with that. So I went to get support. And that was a time where I was super devoted on my relational dynamics. And eventually my late spiritual mentor, who passed a couple years ago, God bless her soul, came into my life, and she started to support me in the spiritual cultivation work that I have been integrating and embodying for the last couple of decades as well. And I learned more about my self-worth and eventually got to a point where I had stepped into this new way of beingness inside of my womanhood and inside of my relationships, and was able to manifest and attract my beloved, the Mister, into my life. And it created a new paradigm of love, not only from my own lived experience, from my lineage. And yet here I am as a practitioner now on the other side of the desk, facilitating positive behavioral change for my clients. And once again, I'm faced with the reflection in the mirror that I have to face. I've been feeling stressed at work. I'm noticing these different power dynamics show up amongst me and my colleagues. And the way I've been handling it and dealing with it hasn't been at my highest. I was confronted with that as I'm working with my clients on how to break free from serious, hardcore addictions that they were saying out there in the scientific studies and all of the articles that are written out there, how the low percentages and what's impossible and all that. But with my God, nothing is impossible, okay? So that's why we bring in the faith over here in my work. We bring in God over here in my work. We don't just bring in the human behavior and dynamics. That's great. I can support you in your human, and we got to bring in the supernatural. We got to bring in the I am that I am. We got to bring in the Almighty God into this thing. And I started to look at the way that I was coping with my stressors inside of my life, my womanhood. I was a solo mama by that point because me and my son's dad split, and I'm in my career and I'm building a career. I had to look at my relationships. I had to look at my leadership. I'm looking at all of it and noticing, who am I when I'm stressed? Which nervous system am I showing up as and am I operating in? And how is that holding me back from experiencing everything else that I want? And something quite profound happened as I started to go deeper into my own embodiment. I started to cultivate this way of being that my mere presence was creating an atmosphere in my office where my colleagues would come in and they would just want to sit there. They wouldn't even want to say anything. They would just sit and they would say, oh, I feel like I can exhale in your presence. I just need a pause. Can I just sit here for a minute? Because I feel so much peace in here. Why does your office feel so different? I had created this atmosphere in my office where clients would come in. Grown men would break down and cry in my presence, and releasing layers and decades of toxic shame that they didn't even know they were holding on to. And that was causing them to turn to these different vices and addictions to numb, to cope. Women sharing sexual trauma they never shared with anyone, not even their own therapists and other practitioners they were working with, but they felt something in my presence. And they came to share, to be liberated. And even though the atmosphere that I was working in was under a specific agency, an organization, and I was in a professional case manager, treatment specialist role, there was something about my spiritual presence that I could never hide, and that was starting to come out. And it was creating an atmosphere for their liberation. Because when you have a healthy nervous system, other people can feel it. I was just reading an article the other day that is a psychology site. I don't remember the exact article, but they were talking about how children and animals can feel when someone has the type of nervous system that is not performing for their attention or their affection. They can feel the warmth emanating from you. And I was sharing with colleagues that I often have children and babies and animals stop me in public who are strangers. They don't know me, and they come up to me. The dogs, they come up to me. The children, they make eye contact with me and they smile. I mean, all the way to where they're dang near breaking their necks in the grocery store in the cart, and they're just turning all the way around. And this psychological article was explaining how they can feel the warmth in that nervous system. However, They're not fooled by people who do that goo goo gaga, or the animals that's trying to get their attention. They're not fooled by that performativeness, and they're repelled by that. They're dismayed by that. They don't want anything to do with that. But the person who's just in their natural beingness, in their original divine design, they can feel that. That's what my clients were feeling. That's what my clients still feel now. And as a result, I witnessed the most profound miracles where individuals who were addicted to hardcore drugs such as heroin and crack cocaine were getting free, and they were restoring their political careers. I had one woman that I worked with who experienced all sorts of different sexual trauma in her childhood, and the level of addiction she had got herself into, it caused homelessness. This woman cleaned her life up in such a way where she was able to not only recover, sustain her recovery, get employed, get a home. She became an RN, a registered nurse, enrolled herself in school, completely radically transformed her life. Because toxic shame can be healed. Toxic shame can be transformed. Toxic shame can be transmuted. And I've continued to see miracles play out now as a guide and a coach and a spiritual advisor inside of my own work that I do now. I've witnessed marriages be restored. I've witnessed experiences where people say that they feel at home in their body for the first time ever. I've witnessed people experience God in tangible, palpable, visceral ways after saying that they've never felt that close to God. I've witnessed people experience miracles inside of their businesses, inside of their leadership, that they hustled and they grind and they were striving so hard for, trying to control and grasp for. But something happened inside of this type of work where they started to experience miracles. And I believe that is because, in part, they learned the way of the embodied supernatural woman. And so if you would allow me to introduce to you Supernatural Standards, which is a 3-day identity immersion where I'm going to show you how to experience and get everything else you've been wanting as a woman, as a lover, as a leader, without trying so darn hard to control the outcome. On day 1, I'm going to lead you through the spiritual woman. On day 2, we're going to talk about the lover. On day 3, we're going to talk about the leader. And I'm going to show you one gap that is standing in the way from you experiencing a supernatural shift in your standards inside of these different roles as a woman, lover, and leader, that's going to support you to not merely be she who seemingly has it all. But in my world, we are the type of women that are she who has it all and holds it all, but doesn't have to hold it all alone. We don't hold it all alone. And we have the capacity to hold everything else we've been desiring. And I'm excited to share with you all of the different ways for you to experience more energy and increase your faith in God, feel closer to God as a woman, to experience deeper, more playful connections inside of your relationship, to feel more respected as a leader, to experience your power elevate as you walk into the boardroom and you're heard by colleagues, even by men, and in your personal brand where you're not hiding in plain sight. I see so many people, well-intentioned people, showing up online, looking a certain way, showing up a certain way, and sounding a certain way. But there's a difference between looking good and it actually being good. In my world, our behind the scenes is way better than online. In my world, our embodiment doesn't match the way we can represent it online. I have a mission to co-create new realities inside of my sacred spaces with spiritually mature, deep, embodied, ambitious women leaders of faith, to be the most embodied women, lovers, and leaders in each room we enter and each encounter we have, which means we have to uphold supernatural standards. I'm going to share more information about how you can join me, and I look forward to experiencing this experience with you. We begin on March 31st, 2026. Feel free to email me if you have questions. I'll put that information below as well. And looking forward to connecting with you very soon, powerful soul. Take care now.